They say one person's trash is another person's treasure, but I never imagined that my weird little hobby would end up being worth more than my brother's car. I'm Katie, and I'm about to tell you how years of being mocked for collecting useless junk led to the most satisfying revenge I never saw coming. It all started when I was 12 years old, wandering through a garage sale in our neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. While other kids my age were obsessing over makeup and boy bands, I was drawn to this old wooden box filled with vintage buttons. Not just any buttons. These were from the 1940s and 50s, some still on their original cards, made from materials like mother of pearl and carved wood that don't exist anymore. $5 for the whole box, the elderly woman said with a smile. My mother was a seamstress. She saved every beautiful button she ever came across. I spent my entire allowance on that box, and from that moment, I was hooked. Over the next 15 years, I became obsessed with vintage sewing notions. Buttons, yes, but also antique scissors, thimbles, measuring tapes, pin cushions, thread spools, anything related to the lost art of home sewing from the early to mid-20th century. I haunted estate sales, flea markets, and antique shops across the Pacific Northwest, building what I genuinely believed was one of the most comprehensive collections of its kind. My family thought I was nuts. Katie's playing with grandma stuff again, my older brother Derek would say whenever I'd come home with a new find. Derek was everything I wasn't. Popular, athletic, focused on what he called normal interests, like sports and cars, and making money in his sales job. Seriously, Katie, he'd continue. When are you going to grow out of this weird phase? You're 27 years old, still collecting buttons like some kind of old lady. It wasn't just Derek. My parents, while more supportive, clearly didn't understand why I spent my weekends driving hours to rural estate sales, or why I got excited about finding a complete set of 1930s Bakelite buttons still in their original packaging. It's just a hobby, Mom would say diplomatically when Derek got particularly cruel about my obsession. But I could see the confusion in her eyes too. Why couldn't I collect something normal, like wine or books? Even my friends thought it was quirky at best, weird at worst. They'd come to my apartment and marvel at the antique sewing machine I'd restored to working condition, the vintage dress forms I used to display particularly beautiful pieces, the careful organization of my collection in labeled boxes and display cases. It's like a museum in here, my friend Sarah once said, and I couldn't tell if she meant it as a compliment. But here's the thing. I didn't care what anyone thought. Every piece in my collection told a story. The buttons from a 1940s wedding dress, the scissors that had belonged to a professional tailor in Chicago, the measuring tape from a home economics classroom in rural Iowa. These weren't just objects to me. They were pieces of history, remnants of a time when people made things with their hands, when craftsmanship mattered, when a woman's sewing box was as important as her jewelry box. I spent years researching every piece, learning about manufacturers, understanding the social history behind domestic arts, building what I knew was an incredibly valuable archive of American material culture. But to everyone else, especially Derek, I was just the weird sister who spent too much money on junk. You know what your problem is, Katie? Derek said last Christmas, after I'd politely declined to join the family's ski trip because I'd found a lead on an estate sale that was supposed to have an incredible collection of vintage simplicity patterns. What's my problem, Derek? You live in the past. You're so obsessed with old stuff that you're missing out on real life, real opportunities, real relationships. This coming from a guy who'd been through 3 girlfriends in the past year because he couldn't commit to anything that didn't immediately benefit him financially. You know what I think? He continued, clearly on a roll. I think you use this collecting stuff as an excuse to avoid growing up. It's like playing dress up, but with dead people's belongings. Dead people's belongings. That's what he called my carefully curated collection. And the money you waste on this crap, he went on. You could be investing in something that actually appreciates in value. Stocks, real estate, crypto, something that could make you rich instead of just making you look like a hoarder. I didn't argue with him. I'd learned years ago that Derek was incapable of understanding that some things have value beyond their potential to generate profit. He saw the world in terms of what could be bought, sold, or leveraged for personal gain. But last month, something happened that changed everything. I was browsing eBay, as I did most evenings, not looking to buy, but to research market values and see what other collectors were selling. That's when I saw it, a listing for a vintage button lot that made my heart stop. The seller clearly had no idea what they were offering. The photos were terrible, the description was minimal, and they'd categorized it under crafts and hobbies instead of collectibles. But I could see enough in those blurry pictures to know that this wasn't just any button lot. These were buttons from the estate of Harriet Henderson, one of the most renowned costume designers in Hollywood's golden age. I'd been researching Henderson for years, ever since I'd found a reference to her button collection in a 1950s Vogue article about behind-the-scenes fashion industry artisans. Henderson had worked on over 200 films between 1935 and 1965, including several Oscar-winning costume designs. She'd been known for her incredible attention to detail and her vast collection of antique and custom-made buttons that she'd used to create historically accurate costumes. And someone was selling her entire button archive on eBay for $50. $50 for what I knew had to be the most significant collection of Hollywood costume design materials ever offered for public sale. I bought it immediately, my hands shaking as I clicked "Buy it now." 3 weeks later, when the boxes arrived, I spent 6 straight hours carefully cataloging what I'd received. There were over 2,000 buttons, many of them one-of-a-kind pieces that Henderson had commissioned from artisans around the world. Buttons made from materials I'd only read about in books: antique ivory, carved jet, 18th century glass, even some pieces that appeared to be made from authentic Civil War-era horn. But the real treasure was the documentation. Henderson had meticulously labeled every button with information about its origin, its use in specific films, and its historical significance. I was holding the personal archive of one of Hollywood's most important costume designers. I knew immediately that this collection was worth more than everything else I owned combined, but I also knew that no one in my family would believe me if I told them. That's when I decided to find out exactly how much my weird little hobby was really worth, and the number I discovered was going to shock everyone who'd ever called my collection worthless junk. Before I tell you what happened when I decided to sell just one piece of Henderson's collection, I need you guys to hit that like button if you're already invested in this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Are you someone who collects things other people don't understand? Have you ever been mocked for a hobby that turned out to be valuable? And make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take a turn that will change how you think about the value of passion, expertise, and never giving up on something you love, even when everyone thinks you're crazy for loving it. Because sometimes the people who mock your dreams are about to get a very expensive lesson in why you should never underestimate someone's passion project. I spent the next 2 weeks living like a detective obsessed with a cold case. Every spare moment I had was dedicated to researching Harriet Henderson's collection, and what I discovered blew my mind. Henderson hadn't just been any costume designer. She'd been the costume designer for some of the most iconic films in Hollywood history. The buttons I now owned had been used in movies like Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, and Sunset Boulevard. I had buttons that Ingrid Bergman had worn, buttons that had adorned Clark Gable's costumes, buttons that had been part of film history. But here's where it got really crazy. I started finding references to Henderson's collection in academic papers about costume design, museum acquisition lists, and auction house catalogs from the 1980s and 90s. Apparently, after Henderson died in 1978, her estate had been broken up and sold piece by piece. Museums, private collectors, and film historians had been trying to track down elements of her archive for decades. I had accidentally purchased what amounted to the holy grail of costume design collectibles for $50. The more I researched, the more valuable my purchase became. I found a 1995 Sotheby's auction where a single button from Henderson's collection, a carved mother-of-pearl piece used in a 1940s period drama, had sold for $1,200. One button, $1,200. I had over 2,000 buttons, plus all of Henderson's documentation. That's when I decided to test the waters. I selected one piece from the collection, a beautiful Art Deco button made from black glass with silver inlay that Henderson had used for a 1938 film noir. According to her notes, it was a custom piece commissioned from a Czech glass artist who'd fled Europe just before World War II. I photographed it carefully, wrote a detailed description based on Henderson's documentation, and listed it on eBay with a starting bid of $100. I figured if I could get a few $100s for it, I'd know I was on the right track. The listing went live on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, I had 12 watchers and 3 questions from potential bidders asking for additional provenance information. By Thursday, the bidding had reached $500. By Friday, I had collectors from around the world contacting me through eBay's messaging system, asking if I had more pieces from Henderson's collection and whether I'd consider private sales. The auction ended on Sunday evening at $2,947. One button. Almost $3,000. I stared at my computer screen in complete shock. In 7 days, I'd made more money from one piece of my worthless collection than Derek made in a month at his sales job. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next week researching everything I could about the collectors who'd been bidding on my auction. I wanted to understand who these people were and what they knew that my family didn't. What I discovered was an entire world of serious collectors, museum curators, film historians, and costume design enthusiasts who treated Hollywood memorabilia like others treated fine art. These weren't casual hobbyists. These were people with advanced degrees in film studies, curators at major museums, private collectors who'd spent decades building archives of entertainment industry artifacts. And they all knew who Harriet Henderson was. More importantly, they all knew how rare and valuable her documented collection was. I started getting emails from people who'd seen my eBay listing, asking if I'd be willing to sell additional pieces privately. A costume design professor from UCLA offered to buy Henderson's entire button collection for $25,000 sight unseen. A museum curator from the Smithsonian asked if I'd consider donating pieces to their entertainment history archive in exchange for a significant tax deduction, $25,000, for my weird little hobby. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could sell everything quickly for a lump sum, or I could take my time and maximize the value by selling pieces individually to the right collectors. I decided to do something else entirely. I was going to prove to my family, especially Derek, exactly how wrong they'd been about my collection. But I wasn't going to just tell them about the money I'd made. I was going to show them in a way they'd never forget. Derek's birthday was coming up in 3 weeks. Every year, our family gathered for dinner at Mom and Dad's house. And every year, Derek made some comment about my weird hobby and how I should spend my money on something practical. This year was going to be different. I selected the most impressive piece from Henderson's collection, a set of 12 matching buttons that had been used on the gown worn by the lead actress in a 1952 Academy Award-winning film. Henderson's notes indicated that these buttons had been carved from a single piece of antique jade and had been featured in close-up shots during the film's most famous scene. I researched comparable sales and found that similar pieces from lesser-known designers had sold for $8,000 to $12,000. Given Henderson's reputation and the provenance of these particular buttons, I estimated they could be worth $15,000 or more. Instead of selling them immediately, I decided to get them professionally appraised. I contacted Dr. Margaret Santos, a professor of fashion history at the Fashion Institute of Technology, who specialized in Hollywood costume design. Dr. Santos had written several books about costume designers of the Golden Age and was considered one of the foremost experts on Henderson's work. Ms. Cooper, she said when I called her, if you truly have documented pieces from Harriet Henderson's personal collection, you've made one of the most significant discoveries in costume design history in the past 20 years. Significant how? Henderson's collection was thought to be lost forever. Museums and researchers have been trying to locate her archive since the 1980s. If you have authentic pieces with her original documentation, you're not just talking about valuable collectibles. You're talking about important historical artifacts. Dr. Santos agreed to authenticate and appraise the jade button set for $500. It was worth every penny to know exactly what I was dealing with. A week later, she called me with results that made my hands shake. Ms. Cooper, I've completed my analysis of your button set. Based on the provenance, the historical significance, the rarity of the materials, and the connection to the specific film, my conservative estimate is that these buttons would sell at auction for between $18,000 and $25,000. $25,000 for 12 buttons that my brother thought were worthless junk. However, Dr. Santos continued, I should mention that I've been contacted by 3 different museums who would be very interested in acquiring this piece for their permanent collections. If you're willing to wait for the right buyer, you could potentially command significantly more than my auction estimate. How much more? For the right collector or institution, possibly as much as $40,000. I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, surrounded by the collection that everyone had mocked for 15 years, realizing that I was sitting on a small fortune. But more than that, I was sitting on vindication. Derek's birthday dinner was in 10 days. I had a plan forming in my mind that would not only prove how wrong he'd been about my hobby, but would also teach him a lesson about the value of passion, expertise, and respecting other people's interests. I was going to sell those jade buttons at Derek's birthday dinner. Not literally, of course. But I was going to show my family exactly what my weird little hobby was really worth. And Derek was never going to make fun of my collection again. Derek's birthday fell on a Saturday, which meant the whole family would be gathered at Mom and Dad's house for what had become our traditional celebration. Dinner, cake, and Derek holding court, while everyone listened to stories about his latest sales achievements and business ventures. These dinners had become increasingly painful for me over the years. Derek loved to position himself as the successful one, the practical one, the one who understood how to make real money in the real world. And inevitably, the conversation would turn to my hobby and how I should follow Derek's example by focusing on more profitable pursuits. But this year, I had a secret weapon. I spent the week before the dinner carefully planning my approach. I wasn't going to ambush Derek with information about my collection's value. That would seem petty and defensive. Instead, I was going to let him set himself up, just like he did every year. I also did something I'd never done before. I brought one of my pieces to show the family. Not the jade buttons, those were too valuable to risk, but I selected a beautiful 1940s compact mirror from my collection that I'd purchased for $25 at an estate sale 5 years earlier. It wasn't part of the Henderson collection, but it was a gorgeous piece. Art Deco design, sterling silver with an intricate engraved pattern, still in perfect working condition. I'd done my research on this piece too. Similar compacts were selling online for $400, $600, depending on condition and provenance. Not Henderson-level money, but still a respectable return on investment. Saturday evening arrived, and I drove to my parents' house with the compact in a small velvet jewelry box, feeling more nervous than I'd been in years. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about standing up for myself and my passions in a way I'd never done before. Derek was already in full swing when I arrived, telling Mom and Dad about some big sale he'd closed at work. The commission alone is going to cover my vacation to Cabo next month, he was saying as I walked into the kitchen. It's all about understanding what people actually need and delivering real value. Not everyone can do it. You need a certain mindset for success in sales. A certain mindset for success. Right. Hey, Katie, Derek said, noticing me for the first time. How's the button business? Find any good trash lately? There it was, 5 minutes into the evening, and Derek was already taking shots at my collection. Actually, I said calmly, I had a pretty interesting week. I found something really special. Oh yeah? Let me guess. Another dusty old sewing box from some dead lady's garage sale? Mom shot Derek a warning look. Derek, be nice. I'm just saying, Katie spends so much time and money on this stuff, but what does she have to show for it? I mean, when's the last time any of those old buttons actually made her money? Perfect. He was walking right into it. That's funny you should ask, I said, pulling out the velvet box, because I actually wanted to show you guys something. I opened the box and revealed the compact. Even in the kitchen lighting, it was obviously beautiful. The silver caught the light. The engraving was intricate and detailed, and it had the kind of weight and craftsmanship that doesn't exist anymore. Oh my God, Katie, that's gorgeous, Mom said immediately. Where did you find it? Estate sale in Gresham about 5 years ago. The woman was selling her aunt's belongings, and this was just sitting in a box with some costume jewelry. Dad picked it up carefully, examining the engraving. This is real silver, isn't it? Look at this craftsmanship. It's beautiful, Mom agreed. But Derek has a point. I mean, it's lovely to look at, but did you pay much for it? $25, I said. Derek laughed. $25 for an old makeup compact? Katie, you got ripped off. You can buy a new compact at Target for $5. You're right, I said. But this isn't just any compact. It's a 1943 Elgin American compact, sterling silver, with hand-engraved Art Deco details. They only made this particular design for 2 years before the war shifted all silver production to military uses. Derek's eyes glazed over. Okay, but so what? It's still just an old makeup compact. Derek, Dad said, still examining the piece. This is really beautiful work. Look at these details. You can't get craftsmanship like this anymore. Dad, don't encourage her. The problem is that Katie thinks everything old is automatically valuable just because it's old. But collectibles are only worth what someone's willing to pay for them. And who's going to pay real money for used makeup containers? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Actually, I said, I've been curious about that myself. So last week, I decided to do some research on current market values for pieces like this. Market values? Derek scoffed. Katie, there's no market for this stuff. You're not going to find collectors lining up to buy old compacts. That's what I thought too. But I decided to check eBay, just to see what similar pieces were selling for. I pulled out my phone and showed them a completed listing for a comparable compact that had sold the previous week. $485, I said quietly. That's what someone paid for a 1942 Elgin compact in similar condition. The kitchen went silent. Derek grabbed my phone and stared at the listing. This has to be fake. Nobody pays $500 for a used makeup compact. Look at the bidding history, I said. 14 different people were bidding on it. The final bidding was between collectors in California and New York. Mom and Dad leaned over to look at the phone screen. I could see the confusion in their faces as they tried to reconcile Derek's confidence about my collection being worthless with the evidence they were seeing. But Katie, Mom said slowly, if this is worth almost $500, that means I paid $25 for something worth $485, I finished, which is about a 2,000% return on investment. Derek was still staring at my phone. This has to be some kind of mistake. Or maybe it's a rare piece and yours isn't the same quality. Maybe, I said. That's why I've been thinking about getting it appraised professionally. Appraised? Dad asked. There are people who specialize in evaluating antique personal accessories. I found a woman in Portland who does authentication and appraisal for estate planning and insurance purposes. Derek finally looked up from my phone. Katie, even if that one listing is real, it doesn't mean your compact is worth the same amount. These things are all different. You're absolutely right, I agreed. That's why I made an appointment with the appraiser for next week. I want to know exactly what I have. What I didn't tell them was that I'd already had the compact appraised. Dr. Santos had looked at it when she'd authenticated the Henderson buttons. Her assessment, 550 by 150, in excellent condition with strong provenance documentation. But I wanted to let Derek stew in uncertainty for a while. Look, Derek said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Even if you got lucky with one piece, that doesn't change the fact that most of your collection is still just old junk that nobody wants. Maybe, I said, but I've been thinking about that too. I've been wondering if maybe I should have some of my other pieces appraised as well, just to see what I actually have. Other pieces? Mom asked. Well, I've been collecting for 15 years. I've got some pretty interesting items that I've never really researched properly. Derek was looking increasingly agitated. Katie, don't get carried away just because you found one listing on eBay. The collectibles market is full of scams and inflated prices. Just because someone listed something for $500 doesn't mean anyone actually paid that much. The listing shows it sold, Derek, with 14 bidders. Those could be fake bids. People manipulate eBay auctions all the time. Dad was still holding the compact, turning it over in his hands. Derek, I have to say, this really is beautiful work, and Katie clearly knows what she's talking about when it comes to the history and craftsmanship. Dad, don't encourage this. Katie's going to convince herself that her entire collection is worth a fortune, and then she's going to be disappointed when she finds out it's not. Maybe, I said. But what if it is? Derek's face was getting red. Katie, you're being ridiculous. You can't base financial decisions on one eBay listing. You're right. That's why I'm going to get professional appraisals, and waste money on appraisal fees for stuff that's probably worthless. The room went quiet again. Derek had just revealed more about his real feelings than he'd probably intended. It wasn't just that he thought my collection was worthless. He was actively invested in it being worthless. Derek, Mom said quietly, why are you so upset about this? If Katie's found something valuable, shouldn't we be happy for her? Derek realized he'd overplayed his hand. I'm not upset. I'm just trying to be realistic. I don't want Katie to get her hopes up about something that's probably not going to pan out. But the damage was done. Everyone in that kitchen could see that Derek wasn't concerned about protecting me from disappointment. He was concerned about being wrong about my collection's value, and he was about to discover just how wrong he'd been. Because next week, I wasn't just getting one piece appraised. I was going to show him exactly what 15 years of worthless junk was really worth. I didn't wait until Derek's next visit to get my collection appraised. The morning after the birthday dinner, I called Dr. Santos again. Dr. Santos, it's Katie Cooper. I was wondering if you'd be interested in evaluating more pieces from my collection beyond the Henderson buttons. Absolutely. Based on what I've seen of your eye for quality and historical significance, I'd be very interested in seeing what else you've acquired over the years. We scheduled an appointment for the following Saturday. Dr. Santos would come to my apartment to examine my entire collection and provide written appraisals for insurance and documentation purposes. I spent the week carefully organizing everything I wanted her to evaluate. Not everything. I had thousands of pieces, but a representative sample that would give me a clear picture of what I'd been building for the past 15 years. Saturday morning arrived, and Dr. Santos showed up with a professional camera, jeweler's loupe, and various measuring tools. She looked like someone heading to an archaeological dig. "Ms. Cooper," she said as she surveyed my apartment, "this is extraordinary. You've essentially built a private museum of domestic arts from the mid-20th century. Thank you. I've always tried to focus on quality and provenance when possible. It shows. Now let's see what treasures you've collected." What happened over the next 4 hours changed my understanding of what I'd been doing for the past 15 years. Dr. Santos didn't just look at my pieces. She researched them in real time, using her laptop to cross-reference makers, designs, and comparable sales. She photographed everything from multiple angles, documented provenance where I had it, and took detailed notes about condition and rarity. "This bakelite button set," she said about a collection I'd bought for $15 at a Portland flea market. "These are Catalan buttons from the 1930s, still on their original cards. Do you know how rare this is? I knew they were old, but Katie, Catalan is a specific type of early plastic that's become incredibly collectible. A complete set like this, in this condition, with the original packaging, I'd estimate $800 for buttons I'd bought for $15. And these scissors," she continued, examining a pair of ornate sewing scissors I'd found at an estate sale in Salem. "These are 1920s Solingen steel with silver inlay, German craftsmanship from before World War II. Easily $400–500. She moved through my collection systematically, and with each piece the numbers got bigger. A thimble I'd bought for $5, $185, rare maker, pristine condition. A measuring tape from the 1940s, $275, working condition, original case. A pincushion shaped like a tomato, $150, iconic design from a famous notions company. "Katie," Dr. Santos said after examining about 30 pieces, "do you realize what you've built here? I'm starting to get an idea. You haven't just been collecting randomly. You have an incredible eye for quality, rarity, and historical significance. Most of these pieces are museum-quality examples of their type." She continued working through my collection, and I continued taking notes as the values added up. But then she got to the Henderson collection. "Oh my God," she whispered, as she opened the first box of Henderson's buttons. "Katie, these aren't just collectibles. These are historical artifacts." She spent 2 hours going through Henderson's documentation, cross-referencing buttons with film databases, and photographing everything with archival quality precision. "Katie, I need to revise my estimate from last week." "Revise it how?" "The jade button set I appraised at $18,000, $25,000. After seeing the full collection and understanding the scope of what you have, I think that was conservative." My heart started racing. "How conservative?" "You don't just have buttons from Henderson's collection. You have her entire working archive, her documentation, her research notes, her personal correspondence with costume departments. This is the kind of find that researchers dream about. So, what does that mean in terms of value?" Dr. Santos was quiet for a long moment, flipping through Henderson's handwritten notes about specific film projects. "Katie, if you sold this collection to the right buyer, a museum, a film school, a serious private collector, you could realistically expect $75,000 to $100,000. I sat down hard on my couch. "Are you serious?" "I'm completely serious. In fact, I think I was still being conservative. If you broke this up and sold pieces individually to specialized collectors, you could potentially do even better. $100,000. But Dr. Santos, that's just the Henderson collection. What about everything else?" She gestured around my apartment at the carefully organized displays and storage systems. "Based on what I've seen today, I'd estimate the total value of your entire collection at somewhere between $125,000 and $175,000. I couldn't speak. "Katie, you've spent 15 years building what is essentially a comprehensive archive of mid-century American domestic arts. You have museum-quality pieces, rare items that collectors would fight over, and documentation that makes everything infinitely more valuable. But I never spent more than $50 or $60 on any single piece. That's what makes this so remarkable. You've been buying treasures for garage sale prices because you understood their historical and aesthetic value when no one else did. After Dr. Santos left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by my collection and tried to process what I'd just learned. For 15 years, Derek had mocked my weird hobby and my worthless junk. I was sitting on a collection worth potentially $175,000. But more than that, I was sitting on validation. Dr. Santos hadn't just appraised my collection. She'd validated my expertise, my eye, my 15 years of research and passion. I wasn't just a weird woman who collected old stuff. I was a serious collector who'd built something important. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I called Derek directly. "Hey Derek, it's Katie. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure, what's up? Still thinking about getting that old compact appraised?" "Actually, I did get it appraised. Today, in fact." "Really? What did they tell you?" $650. The appraiser said it was an excellent example of 1940s American craftsmanship and that I'd made a very good purchase. Silence on Derek's end. "Derek, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here. 650, really?" "Really. But Derek, that's not why I called." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the appraiser was so impressed with that piece that she asked to see more of my collection. So I had her evaluate some of my other items too. And I think you might want to sit down for this conversation." I was about to tell Derek that his sister's worthless junk was worth more than his annual salary, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. "Derek, are you sitting down?" "Katie, what's going on? You're being weird. I just spent 4 hours with a professional appraiser who specializes in vintage collectibles and historical artifacts." "Okay." "She evaluated 35 pieces from my collection. And I looked at the detailed appraisal report Dr. Santos had left with me, with individual values listed next to each item. The total value came to $47,350. Complete silence on Derek's end, not even breathing. "Derek? That's impossible. $47,350 for 35 pieces. That's an average of about $1,350 per item. Katie, that has to be wrong. Did you pay this appraiser? Because if you paid her, she has an incentive to inflate the values." "Actually, Derek, that's not how professional appraisals work. Dr. Santos is a professor at FIT who does authentication and valuation for museums and estate planning. Her reputation depends on accuracy, not making customers happy." "But Katie, these are just old buttons and sewing stuff. How can they be worth that much money?" "Because they're not just old buttons, Derek. They're historical artifacts. Pieces that tell the story of American craftsmanship and domestic life in the mid-20th century. That's collector nonsense. People who pay those kinds of prices for old junk are getting scammed." I could hear the desperation in Derek's voice. He was trying so hard to make my success fit into his worldview, where my interests were worthless and his were valuable. "Derek, can I ask you something?" "What?" "How much is your car worth?" "What does that have to do with anything? Just humor me. Your BMW that you're so proud of. What's it worth?" "I don't know, maybe $35,000. "And how much did you pay for it?" $42,000, but... "So in 2 years, your car has lost $7,000 in value. Cars depreciate, Katie. That's normal." "Right, but my collection has appreciated. I spent maybe $800 total on those 35 pieces over the years, and they're now worth $47,350. That's not the same thing, Katie. Cars are useful. You can drive a car, and collectors can display, research, and appreciate historical artifacts. Different kinds of utility, Derek. Look, even if your appraiser is right about some of those pieces being valuable, you still can't just assume the rest of your collection is worth the same amount. You're absolutely right. That's why I asked her to give me a rough estimate for my entire collection." Another pause. What did she say? She estimated the total value at between $125,000 and $175,000. The silence lasted so long, I thought Derek had hung up. "Derek? That's impossible, Katie. There's no way your stuff is worth that much." "Why is it impossible?" Because if it was really worth that much, someone else would have noticed by now. The people selling this stuff at estate sales would know what they had. Derek, most people don't know what they have because they don't have 15 years of research and expertise. I know what to look for because I've studied this stuff obsessively. But Katie, Derek, let me ask you something else. What do you know about vintage sewing notions? What do you mean? I mean, could you walk into an estate sale and identify a 1930s Catalan button versus a 1970s plastic button? Could you tell the difference between Solingen steel and modern stamped scissors? Do you know which manufacturers made the highest quality thimbles? No, but then how can you be so confident about what my collection is worth? You just admitted you don't know anything about the market I collect in. Derek was getting frustrated. Katie, I know about investing. I know about markets. And what you're describing sounds like a bubble. Like people paying crazy prices for things that aren't actually worth it. Maybe. But if it's a bubble, it's been going on for about 30 years. These aren't new price levels, Derek. This is an established market with serious collectors, museum acquisitions, and academic research. I can't believe that old buttons are worth more than my car. They're not just old buttons, Derek. But even if they were, why is it so hard for you to accept that I might know something you don't? That hit home. Derek went quiet. Look, Katie, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I just worry that you're getting carried away with inflated appraisals. I appreciate the concern. But Derek, what if you're wrong? What if I've actually built something valuable through years of research and careful collecting? Then I guess I owe you an apology. Maybe. But there's something else I want to tell you. What now? The appraiser was particularly interested in one subset of my collection. I have some pieces that belong to a famous Hollywood costume designer from the 1940s and 50s. How did you get those? I bought them on eBay 3 months ago for $50. $50. The seller didn't know what they had, but I recognized the name and the documentation. And they're worth... The appraiser estimates that collection alone could be worth $75,000 to $100,000. Derek didn't say anything for a full minute. Derek, are you okay? You made a $100,000 profit on a $50 eBay purchase? Potentially, yes. That's insane, Katie. That's expertise, Derek. That's what happens when you spend 15 years learning everything you can about something you're passionate about. But how did you even know to look for this stuff on eBay? Because I research constantly. I read auction catalogs, follow museum acquisitions, study collection sales. I know what's rare and what's common because I've made it my business to know. So you're telling me that all those years I was making fun of your hobby, you were making fun of something you didn't understand that was actually quite valuable, yes. Derek was quiet for another long moment. Katie, I feel like an idiot. You should. Can I see some of this stuff? I mean, actually look at it and understand what makes it valuable. Derek, you've been to my apartment dozens of times. You've seen all of this stuff. You just never bothered to actually look at it or ask questions about it. I know, but I dismissed it without really understanding what you were doing. Yes, you did. And I probably hurt your feelings a lot over the years. Yes, you did. Katie, I'm sorry. I'm really, genuinely sorry. I wasn't ready to let him off the hook that easily. Derek, do you know what bothered me most about your attitude toward my collecting? What? It wasn't just that you thought it was worthless. It was that you thought I was stupid for caring about it. Katie, you acted like my passion for historical research and craftsmanship was somehow inferior to your interest in making money and buying expensive things. Like my values were wrong because they weren't your values. I didn't mean... You did mean it, Derek. You meant every condescending comment about dead people's belongings and weird phases and growing up. Derek was quiet. The thing is, Derek, I never criticized your interests. I never made fun of your car or your sales job or your focus on making money. I just quietly pursued something I loved while you spent years making me feel stupid for loving it. You're right, and I'm sorry. Are you sorry because I was right about the value? Or are you sorry because you were cruel to me for 15 years? Another long pause. Both, I guess. But Katie, what can I do to make this right? I don't know if you can, Derek. Trust isn't something you can just fix with an apology. So, what happens now? Now I decide what I want to do with my collection. And you learn that maybe, just maybe, your little sister knows a few things about value that you don't. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the conversation. Derek's apology felt genuine, but it had also come only after he'd learned about the monetary value of my collection. Would he have apologized if my hobby had turned out to be worthless? I doubted it, but that was okay, because this wasn't really about Derek's approval anymore. This was about me finally understanding that I'd spent 15 years building something remarkable, regardless of what anyone else thought about it, and tomorrow, I was going to do something that would prove to everyone, especially myself, exactly how remarkable it was. I was going to sell one piece from the Henderson collection, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to see what would happen when my weird little hobby hit the real market. I spent the next 3 days researching the best way to sell one piece from the Henderson collection. Dr. Santos had given me several options: private collectors, museum sales, specialty auction houses, or high-end eBay auctions with proper documentation. I decided to go with eBay, but this time I was going to do it right. Instead of the single button I'd tested the waters with, I selected a complete set of 12 Art Deco buttons that Henderson had used for a 1948 film starring Rita Hayworth. According to Henderson's notes, these buttons had been featured in close-up shots during the movie's most famous dance sequence. More importantly, I had everything a serious collector would want: Henderson's original documentation, photographs of the buttons being used in the film, and even a letter from the film's costume department discussing the custom design work. This wasn't just a collectible. It was a piece of documented Hollywood history. I spent 2 days photographing the buttons from every angle, scanning Henderson's documentation, and writing a detailed description that would appeal to serious collectors. I included information about Henderson's career, the specific film, the materials used in the buttons, and the provenance documentation I could provide. Then I did something I'd never done before. I set a starting bid of $5,000. $5,000 for 12 buttons. I figured if Derek was right about my collection being overvalued, this auction would prove it. No one would bid seriously on buttons worth thousands of dollars. But if Dr. Santos was right about the value of Henderson's documented pieces, this auction would prove that too. The listing went live on Tuesday evening. Within an hour, I had 15 watchers and 3 questions from potential bidders asking for additional provenance information. By Wednesday morning, someone had placed the first bid at $5,000. By Wednesday afternoon, the bidding had reached $7,500. By Thursday, I was getting direct messages from collectors asking if I had additional Henderson pieces and whether I'd consider ending the auction early for a private sale. One message stood out. "Ms. Cooper, I represent the Costume Designers Guild archives. We've been searching for Henderson's work for decades. Please contact me regarding potential museum acquisition of your entire Henderson collection." The Costume Designers Guild. They wanted to buy my entire Henderson collection for their archives. By Friday, the eBay auction had reached $12,000, and I had 3 different private offers ranging from $15,000 to $18,000 to end the auction early. I let it run. Sunday evening, I sat at my computer watching the final minutes of the auction. There were 6 active bidders, and the price had climbed to $16,500. In the last 30 seconds, a bidding war erupted. $17,000, $17,500, $18,000, $18,500. With 5 seconds left, someone placed a bid for $19,200. The auction ended at $19,200. $19,200. For 12 buttons that were part of a collection I'd bought for $50. I stared at the screen, not quite believing what I was seeing. Then I started laughing. Not just giggling, full, uncontrollable laughter that brought tears to my eyes. I'd just made more money in 1 week than Derek made in 4 months at his sales job. But more than that, I'd proved something to myself that was worth more than any amount of money. My expertise was real. My passion had value. And 15 years of dedication to something I loved had built something truly remarkable. My phone rang. "Derek, Katie, Mom told me you were selling something from your collection. How did it go?" "It went well." "How well?" "Derek, you know that BMW you're so proud of? The one worth $35,000? "Yeah? I just sold 12 buttons for more than half the value of your car." Silence. "Katie, how much did you sell them for?" $19,200. "Jesus Christ, Katie. $19,200? Plus, I've got 3 museums interested in buying my Henderson collection privately, and about a dozen collectors asking if I have other pieces for sale. How many buttons do you have from this Henderson person?" "Over 2,000 pieces, plus all her documentation and research notes." Derek was quiet for a long time. "Katie, if you sold them all individually, I'd probably make somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, according to Dr. Santos." $500,000? Conservatively. From a $50 eBay purchase? From 15 years of expertise that allowed me to recognize a $50 opportunity that no one else saw. Derek didn't say anything for several minutes. "Derek, are you still there?" "I'm here. I'm just... Katie, I don't know what to say." "You could say you're proud of me." "I am proud of you. But I'm also... God, Katie, I'm so embarrassed about how I've treated you all these years." "You should be." "All those comments about worthless junk and wasting money and living in the past? Yeah, those were pretty awful. Katie, you're going to be rich. Like, seriously rich. From your hobby. Maybe. But Derek, that's not the point." "What do you mean?" I mean that the money is nice, but it's not why I did this. I collected these things because I loved them, because I found them beautiful and historically significant. The fact that they're worth money is just validation. Validation of what? Validation that passion and expertise have value, even when other people don't understand them. Validation that caring deeply about something most people ignore can lead to remarkable discoveries. And validation that your big brother was a complete ass for 15 years? That too. Derek laughed, but it sounded sad. Katie, what are you going to do now? Are you going to sell everything? I don't know yet. I might sell some pieces to museums where they'll be preserved and displayed for other people to appreciate. I might keep some pieces because I love them and want to continue studying them. But you could retire tomorrow if you wanted to. I could, theoretically. But Derek, I love what I do. I love the research, the discovery, the learning. Why would I stop doing something I love just because I could afford to? Because that's what money is for? Financial freedom? Derek, I already had freedom. I was already doing exactly what I wanted to do with my life. The money just means I can do it without worrying about rent. After we hung up, I walked around my apartment looking at my collection with new eyes. Not because the monetary value had changed how I felt about the pieces, but because I finally felt vindicated in my passion for them. For 15 years, I'd been collecting and studying these objects because I found them beautiful, historically significant, and personally meaningful. The fact that other people now recognize their value too was deeply satisfying. But what was even more satisfying was the realization that I'd trusted my own judgment, pursued something I believed in despite criticism, and built expertise that no one could take away from me. The money was nice, but the vindication was priceless, and I wasn't done yet, because tomorrow I was going to make Derek an offer that would change both of our lives forever. The next morning, I called Derek and asked him to meet me for coffee. I had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane, and I needed to run it by him before I made any major decisions about my collection. We met at a cafe in downtown Portland, and for the first time in years, Derek looked genuinely humble. He'd clearly spent the night processing the fact that his little sister's weird hobby was worth more than his annual salary. "Katie," he said as soon as I sat down, "I've been thinking about everything you told me yesterday, and I need to say something." "What's that?" "I was wrong. Not just about the value of your collection, but about everything. About dismissing your interests. About assuming I knew better than you. About treating your passion like it was somehow less valid than mine." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that. But more than that, I'm impressed. What you've built, the expertise you've developed, the way you turned something you love into something valuable, that's actually incredible business sense." "Business sense?" "Katie, you identified an undervalued market, developed specialized knowledge, built relationships with experts, and consistently bought low and sold high. That's sophisticated investing, even if it didn't look like it to me." I hadn't thought of it that way, but Derek was right. I had been running a long-term investment strategy, just one based on passion and expertise rather than financial projections. "Derek, I asked you here because I want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "I want to hire you." Derek looked confused. "Hire me for what?" "To help me turn this collection into a business." "Katie, I don't know anything about antiques or collectibles." "No, but you know about sales, marketing, and business development. And I think I'm going to need those skills." I pulled out a folder with the research I'd done over the past few days. "Derek, I've been thinking about what happens next. I've got a collection worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. I've got museums and collectors already reaching out to me. I've got expertise that took 15 years to develop. Okay, what I don't have is a systematic way to monetize this knowledge and these connections. I've been approached by 3 different museums about consulting on their collections. 2 auction houses want me to authenticate pieces for them, and I've got collectors asking me to help them evaluate potential purchases." Derek's eyes lit up. "You're talking about building a business around your expertise." "Exactly. Authentication services, collection consulting, maybe even sourcing pieces for serious collectors. There's a whole market of people who want what I know, but don't have 15 years to develop the expertise themselves. That's actually a really smart business model. But I need help with the business side. Marketing, client development, pricing strategies, legal structure, all the stuff you're good at that I know nothing about." Derek leaned forward. "Katie, are you seriously offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. You handle the business development and operations. I handle the expertise and authentication. We split everything, 50-50. But Katie, this is your knowledge, your collection, your expertise. Why would you give me half? Because I can't scale this alone. And because despite everything that's happened between us, you're good at what you do. You understand how to build relationships with clients, how to price services, how to grow a business. Derek was quiet for a moment. What would this look like practically? We start with the Henderson collection. Instead of selling pieces individually on eBay, we approach museums, film schools, and serious collectors with a professionally curated offering. We document everything properly, provide authentication services, maybe even organize a traveling exhibition. A traveling exhibition? Think about it, Derek. Henderson worked on over 200 films. There are film schools, fashion museums, and entertainment history archives all over the country that would love to display documented pieces from her collection. Derek's expression was changing as he started to see the possibilities. And then we expand beyond Henderson. We offer authentication services for other collectors who think they might have valuable pieces. We consult with estates that are liquidating collections. We help people who inherited stuff figure out what they actually have. Katie, this could be huge. It could be, but I need someone who understands business operations to help me build it. What about my current job? What about it? Derek, you hate your sales job. You've complained about it for years. This would be the chance to build something from the ground up, to be your own boss, to work with genuinely interesting and valuable items. Derek was getting excited. I could see it in his face. Katie, can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you offering this to me? After everything I've said about your collection, after all the years of making you feel bad about your interests, why would you want to work with me? I thought about that question for a moment. Because you're my brother, and I believe in second chances. Because you're good at what you do, even if you've been an ass about my interests. And because I think you've learned something important about the value of expertise and passion. I have learned something. I've learned that dismissing something just because I don't understand it is stupid and arrogant. Good. That's the first qualification for this job. Intellectual humility. Derek laughed. What are the other qualifications? Respect for expertise, appreciation for craftsmanship and history, and the ability to never, ever refer to my collection as dead people's belongings again. Deal. Definitely deal. We spent the next 2 hours talking through the practical details of what this business could look like. Derek's enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time, I could see how his business skills could actually complement my expertise in a meaningful way. Katie, he said as we were getting ready to leave, can I tell you something? What? This is the most excited I've been about work in years. My sales job is just pushing products that people don't really need, making commission on transactions that don't matter. But this, helping people understand the value of historical artifacts, connecting collectors with pieces they're passionate about, this feels meaningful. It is meaningful, Derek. That's what I've been trying to tell you for 15 years. I know, and I'm sorry it took me so long to listen. As we walked out of the cafe, Derek turned to me one more time. Katie, what do we call this business? I thought for a moment. How about Cooper & Cooper Historical Collections? I like it. It sounds serious and professional. Good, because we're about to be very serious and very professional about something I've been passionate about my entire adult life. And profitable? Very profitable if we do this right. Derek grinned. Katie, I think we're going to do this very right. For the first time in 15 years, Derek and I were on the same team, and we were about to turn my weird little hobby into something that would change both of our lives forever. But first, we had to tell Mom and Dad that their children were going into business together, selling old junk for hundreds of thousands of dollars. That conversation was going to be interesting. 2 weeks later, Derek and I had our business plan ready. We'd consulted with lawyers about partnership structures, talked to accountants about tax implications, and even had preliminary conversations with insurance companies about covering high-value collectibles. More importantly, we'd started getting serious interest from potential clients. The Costume Designers Guild wanted to hire us to authenticate and catalog Henderson pieces for their permanent archive. A private collector in New York was interested in commissioning us to locate specific items for his collection. And a film school in Los Angeles wanted to discuss a consulting contract for their entertainment history program. It was time to tell the family. We arranged dinner at Mom and Dad's house, ostensibly to celebrate Derek's birthday belatedly, but really to announce our new business partnership. So, Mom said as we settled in around the dinner table, Katie tells me you two have been spending a lot of time together lately. That's nice to see. Derek and I exchanged glances. We'd agreed that I would take the lead in explaining what we were doing, since it was my expertise that made everything possible. Actually, Mom, Derek and I have some news we want to share with you. Oh? Dad looked intrigued. What kind of news? We're starting a business together. Mom nearly choked on her wine. A business? What kind of business? Historical collections, consulting, and authentication services, Derek said proudly. Dad frowned. What does that mean exactly? I pulled out the folder with our business plan and some sample pieces from my collection. It means we're turning my hobby into a professional service. Museums, collectors, and estates need experts who can authenticate historical artifacts, evaluate collections, and provide provenance documentation. And there's money in that? Dad asked skeptically. Dad, Derek said, Katie sold 12 buttons for $19,200 last week. The table went silent. $19,000? Mom whispered. For buttons? For documented Hollywood costume design artifacts with historical significance and verified provenance, I corrected. But Katie, Dad said slowly, that seems like an extraordinary amount of money for buttons. Derek laughed. Dad, that's exactly what I said, right up until Katie proved me completely wrong about the value of her collection. I opened my folder and showed them the appraisal report Dr. Santos had prepared. Mom, Dad, I need you to understand something. What I've been doing for the past 15 years isn't just a hobby. I've been building expertise in a specialized field and accumulating a collection that experts now value at potentially over $150,000. Dad's jaw dropped. $150,000. Conservatively, the Henderson collection alone could be worth significantly more if we market it properly. Who's Henderson? Mom asked. Derek and I spent the next hour explaining everything. Harriet Henderson's career, the significance of her collection, the authentication process, the market for high-end collectibles, and our plan to build a business around my expertise. So, you're telling me, Dad said finally, that Katie's been building a small fortune out of things she bought at garage sales and estate sales? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Derek said. Dad, Katie has an incredible eye for valuable pieces, and she spent 15 years learning everything there is to know about this market. She could probably retire tomorrow if she wanted to. But instead, I added, I want to turn this knowledge into something bigger, help other people understand what they have, connect serious collectors with important pieces, preserve historical artifacts that might otherwise be lost. Mom looked confused. But honey, if your collection is worth so much money, why do you need Derek's help? Because I know about historical artifacts, but I don't know about running a business. Derek knows about client development, marketing, operations, pricing strategies, all the things I'd need to learn to make this work professionally. And, Derek added, because I finally understand that what Katie's been doing is actually sophisticated market analysis and investment strategy. She's been identifying undervalued assets in a specialized market and building a portfolio based on expert knowledge. Dad shook his head slowly. I have to admit, I never understood Katie's interest in old sewing supplies. It seemed like such an unusual hobby for a young woman. It is unusual, Dad. That's what makes it valuable. Most people don't have the patience or interest to develop deep expertise in historical domestic arts. But the people who do care about this stuff, museums, serious collectors, researchers, they're willing to pay significant money for authentic expertise. Mom was still processing everything. So, Derek, you're leaving your sales job? I'm giving my 2 weeks notice on Monday. Mom, Katie's offering me the chance to be a partner in something that could be much more successful than anything I could build selling other people's products. And you believe in this? Button business? Dad asked Derek directly. Derek laughed. Dad, a week ago I would have said the same thing. But then Katie showed me actual sales data, professional appraisals, and interest from legitimate institutions. This isn't some crazy scheme. This is a real market with real money. I pulled out the letters we'd received from potential clients. Mom, Dad, look at these. The Costume Designers Guild wants to hire us to catalog and authenticate pieces for their archive. A collector in New York wants us to source specific items for his collection. A film school wants to discuss consulting on their entertainment history program. These are real organizations offering real contracts, Derek added. Katie's not just selling things on eBay. She's built expertise that institutions value. Dad examined the letters carefully. These do look legitimate. They are legitimate, Dad. What Katie's done is identify a market need that most people don't even know exists. There are thousands of people who have inherited collections or found interesting items, but they don't know what they have or how to evaluate it properly. And there are serious collectors who want to add to their collections, but need expert help identifying authentic pieces and avoiding fakes, I continued. Mom looked at both of us. I have to say, I'm impressed that you two are working together on this. A few weeks ago, Derek was making fun of Katie's collecting, and now you're business partners? Derek's face got serious. Mom, I owe Katie a huge apology. I spent years dismissing something I didn't understand, and it turns out she was building something remarkable the whole time. I was horrible to her about her collection, and I was completely wrong. Not just about the money, but about the value of passion and expertise and following your interests even when other people don't get it. I reached over and squeezed Derek's hand, but he's making up for it now by helping me turn this into something bigger than I could build alone. Dad raised his wine glass. Well, I have to say, this is not the dinner conversation I was expecting tonight. What were you expecting? Derek asked. I was expecting Katie to tell us about her button collecting, and Derek to make some joke about dead people's belongings. We all laughed. But instead, Dad continued, I'm learning that my daughter is apparently a business genius who's been building a fortune out of garage sale finds, and my son is leaving his corporate job to become a partner in the vintage button business. Historical collections, consulting, and authentication services, I corrected with a smile. Right, that. Mom raised her glass too. To Katie, for following her passion even when no one understood it. And to Derek, for being smart enough to recognize when he was wrong and humble enough to learn from his sister. And to Cooper & Cooper Historical Collections, Derek added. May we build something amazing together. As we toasted our new business partnership, I realized that this was about more than just money or professional success. This was about family learning to value each other's strengths, about passion and expertise being recognized and rewarded, and about turning something I loved into something that could make a difference for other people who cared about preserving history. Derek had learned that dismissing other people's interests is not just cruel, but also stupid. I'd learned that my passion had real value in the real world. And together, we were about to prove that sometimes the best business ideas come from the things other people think are worthless. 6 months later, Cooper & Cooper Historical Collections had authenticated over $2 million worth of historical artifacts, consulted on 3 museum exhibitions, and helped dozens of families understand the value of items they'd inherited from previous generations. Derek had never been happier with his work, and I had never felt more validated in my decision to follow my passion despite years of criticism. And every time someone brought us a collection of old junk that turned out to be historically significant and financially valuable, I thought about how close I'd come to giving up on collecting because of other people's opinions. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving your critics wrong. It's building something so successful that they ask to be part of it. Hey everyone, I hope you loved this incredible journey from hobby mockery to business partnership. If this story inspired you to think differently about following your passions, even when others don't understand them, smash that like button. It really helps me know what resonates with you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And let me know. Do you have a hobby or interest that others have dismissed? Have you ever discovered something valuable that everyone else overlooked? What would you do if your weird hobby turned out to be worth a fortune? Make sure you're subscribed, because I've got more amazing stories coming your way about people who trusted their instincts, followed their passions, and proved that expertise and dedication can lead to incredible success, even in the most unexpected fields. Thanks for joining me on Katie's journey from ridiculed collector to successful entrepreneur. And remember, never let anyone make you feel bad for caring deeply about something, because you never know when that passion might change your life in ways you never imagined. Until next time, keep following your interests, trust your expertise, and never underestimate the value of knowing something that nobody else understands.